My brain was always, okay, if something does happen, who are we going to be? What is it going to bring out in us? And I have a deep seated belief in the goodness and heroic nature of the everyday person. I firmly believe that most people simply need the opportunity to present how heroic they truly are.
So joining us now on Open Book, and she is a returning star to Open Book. She's a best-selling author, international best-selling author. She's crushing it in every which way. She's a former flight attendant. It's sort of a crazy story. Her new book is called Worst Case Scenario. It's great to have you back on the show. Who knew? Who knew, and when did they know that TJ Newman was such a brilliant suspense writer? That's my first question. And welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me back. It's great. It's great to be talking with you again. And who knew? I guess I'm going to give credit to my agent for knowing that there was something there because, I got stories to tell and I thought I could write them, and
Let's start with TJ Newman. You were like, "Hey, I got stories to tell, and I can put it down in a gripping, intense way." And so you just said one day I'm going to start with a pen and a paper or a word processor, and I'm going to bang out some great concepts and ideas and grind out a story, right?
sort of. Yeah, I'm a lifelong reader and writer. I've always dreamed of wanting to be a published author. My road to get here was long and hard and uphill, and certainly not in a straight line. There was lots of starts and stops and lots of rejection. That's why I guess I credited my agent because yes, to your point, I thought the stories that I had to tell people would connect with and people would enjoy and people would find interesting. But, when I started trying to put them out there, nobody seemed interested at all until, my 42nd agent that I sent my manuscript for my first book to said, yeah, this is a good story. Let's get it out there.
So let me rephrase the question. I want to phrase it like an entrepreneur. Okay, you've got a job. It's a good job. You're a flight attendant. You have a good job, good pay, good benefits, getting to see the world, but you have this burning desire, you have this burning passion to do something else. How do you get the courage up to go from, you could have been golden handcuffed into that job, right? Good pay, good job, good career. How do you go from that? Take us through the thought cycle, the fear cycle of going from that into the realm of living your dream.
I'll actually translate it to entrepreneurial terms as well, because when I was just dreaming of this life that I am now living, I didn't know fully what direction to go in. And I was in my mid 20s, didn't know where to go, living at home with my parents after graduating from college and pursuing my first attempt in New York at being an actor. And I didn't know what to do with my life. And I took a seminar in entrepreneurship because I was looking at everything, including starting businesses, because I had some business ideas too. And I remember in this entrepreneurial seminar that I took, they used the example of a pizza parlor. And they said, look, if you're going to open up a restaurant, let's say a pizza parlor, it's going to be expensive. It's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be a huge risk. You are going to work constantly, and the chances are very good that this is just not going to succeed because that's just how starting a business goes, right? Especially a restaurant, something like that. You're just probably not going to succeed. You need to be able to answer the question, why is the pizza that you're going to make and sell something that the consumer is going to want to buy over the pizza parlor that's up the street? Because there's tons of pizza parlors. Over any of them, why are people going to go out of their way to buy your slice of pizza? And if you don't have a good answer to that question, then you should probably reconsider whether or not you going to all the effort and pain that you're going to go to open this pizza parlor is worth it. And that stuck with me. And when I was writing stories and coming up with all sorts of different things, I never found that slice of pizza. But when I had the idea for my first book, something clicked in me and I went, I don't know who would be able to tell this story better than I can. With the lived experience that I've had and being a flight attendant for 10 years and the way my mind thinks and the way that I see the world, I don't think anyone could tell this story better than I could. And that's why I spent as long as I did and worked as hard as I did and refused to stop with that book, was because I knew I had a slice of pizza that people would want and people would go out of their way to get. And it was that belief that made me push forward with that book. And that's somehow how we're here talking about my third book coming out.
Well, listen, I asked the question because I love the story, and I always try to push people towards their dreams. Life is short, and you had your fits and starts, you had your failed moments where 40 plus people turned you down, and now you're on to a catastrophic trilogy, girl. Okay, I mean, you got 3 books. Every time I read the book, I feel like I'm getting constipated because everything gets tight on me. Okay, my God. Okay, so the seed for this book really happened during your first book, which was a bestseller called Falling. Tell us a little bit about the research and give us the plot line. I don't want to ruin the book for anybody. All I can tell people that are listening in, if you open this book, you read 5 pages, you're already in it. You're out of the plane in 5 pages, by the way, but you're in the thick of it, and you won't stop reading it until you put it down. It's a great summary, great beach read. If you fear flying, I don't want to read it. I can just tell you that. But if you don't fear flying, it's very, very enjoyable. But go ahead. Tell us how you got the idea and tell us what the plot is.
Yeah, so the idea for this one, the seed was planted years ago, actually, when I was doing research for my first book, Falling. And I was having questions every day with pilots that I would be flying with about flying, about like the nuts and bolts of flying, policy, procedure, those types of questions. But I was also asked them questions about the psychological side of being a pilot, the emotional side of being a pilot. And the question that I asked all of them was, what's your biggest fear? As a pilot, what's your biggest fear? And one day when I asked this pilot this, I was stopped dead in my tracks because he looked me in the eye and said, my biggest fear is a commercial airliner crashing into a nuclear power plant.
Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That was my reaction.
Right.
And I immediately started to sort of downplay it, right? Because in my mind, I'm going, we live in a post 9/11 world. We have shown, it has been proved that these structures are fortified. They are able to withstand something like that happening. Like, that's not a rational fear, because we know that these facilities are safe. And I'm telling him all of this, and I'm going into why I'm not afraid of this, and he's just listening to me. And when I finally get to the end of my reasoning why I'm not afraid, he looks me in the eye and goes, and that's exactly what they want you to think. And that, it was like a moment, where like the hair on the back of your neck stands up on edge, and you just, deeply unsettling moment. And I tucked it away. And when I went back to, looking at, okay, what is my third book going to be? And I knew I had to go bigger than my first, bigger than my second. I wanted to see how big I could get this, if I could get this as big as possible. And I went back to that idea and I started researching just to see, like, is there something there? Is there actually something to that? So I started researching, not expecting much. And very quickly, I realized he was completely validated in his fears. And I mean, to the point that I almost didn't write the book because I found the research so terrifying. The premise for this book and what happens afterwards is completely plausible. And that terrified me.
Yeah. Well, basically, so let's go over it. I don't want to give up the plot and the personalities and people because it's just too much fun. And I don't want to give that up to people. But let's talk a little bit about a nuclear reactor. Talk about things that can go wrong in a nuclear reactor. And there's several levels of things that can go wrong. And of course, if you're at a level 7, that's something like a Fukushima in Japan, or it could be a Chernobyl, which was a real disaster in 1986. It was actually in Ukraine, I believe, right? It was on the northern
former
side.
USSR, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
former USSR, but that land has been irradiated and sort of still 38 years later, sort of a wasteland. But a level 8 nuclear disaster at a nuclear reactor is a big leap from a level 7. So tell us what the difference is between a level 7 and a level 8.
Sure. The INES scale only goes up to seven, and seven is Chernobyl, and seven is Fukushima. And the scenario in which I envisioned for this book would be a level. It would exceed anything that we have seen. It would impact on a global scale. It would not be localized. It would be on a global scale. The potential for what the ramifications could be. Because if you have an accident, an incident at a nuclear power plant, depending on the location, depending on the size of it, it's in the air, it's in the water, it's in the soil. We are a massively agricultural country, and most of our agricultural endeavors are used for exports to other countries. We wouldn't be talking about a food scarcity issue solely in the United States. It would be all around the world. And most of the countries that we export to are countries that are already plagued with issues due to climate change and agricultural issues that they have there as a result of that. So we are such a more globally interconnected, you know, planet now that something like this doesn't happen in a vacuum. It would not be easy to quarantine. It would not be easy to control the ripple effects of something like this. And in the book, the incident happens at a nuclear power plant that's in Minnesota, basically at the top of the Mississippi River. And if you look at a map of the country, the Mississippi River, it's like a spine, just goes straight down the entire country, top to bottom. And then the tributaries go out. If you have a contamination at the top in Minnesota, like in the book, it would seep all the way down and all the way out through the whole country. Drinking water, water for agriculture, in the air, it would be everywhere. People would have to evacuate the area. You mentioned Chernobyl. You think of the exclusion zone in surrounding, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. There's nothing there. Everyone had to leave. You go there now, you can look it up online. It's just a ghost town. Everything just frozen in place from that moment. Now put that in the heartland, put that in the Midwest, and just imagine, where's everybody going? Where is everybody leaving when they have to leave this area? We would have a mass migration of which we've never seen before. It would be a refugee crisis of American refugees on American soil.
Yeah, no, it's unbelievably scary, and I'm sure terrorists have thought about it. It's not like you're the first person to think about it, but you're the first person to really explain it in a way that makes it palpable and makes it real. You do something else in the book, which I find interesting. You've taken your life experience and you've infused it in the book. It's like if I wrote a book about a plane crash, even if I'm like an excellent writer and I got an A in English composition freshman year, I can't grasp all of the different technical nuances that you have. I think you first worked for Virgin. I think I remember that correctly. And it was one of the first airlines to really embrace technology. I remember they had those in-seat communication devices, and eventually they were the first people to get the Wi-Fi on the phone. Tell us about how you incorporated that background of yours and that embrace of technology into the book.
Yeah, absolutely. In my first book, that especially takes place in my first book. And when I was writing my first book, Virgin America was one of the first airlines to have fleet-wide Wi-Fi. We were one of the first to have, to bring back after September 11th, when everything was sort of pared back and stripped down within the airline industry. We were the first to bring back in-seat TVs and entertainment. Live satellite TV, which would be showing the news. It would be broadcasting that. Planes used to be, before technology, just sort of an isolated bubble. For just a handful of hours, this group of people was its own little sovereign nation floating above, the rest of the world, untouched. There was no way to communicate up, communicate down. It was just sort of like this floating entity of humanity. Well, as soon as you start incorporating technology, you can now penetrate that distance, that bubble. It's no longer an isolated thing. You know what's happening on the plane, as it's happening on the ground. And I think as a storyteller, I saw that and saw how that could be both a wonderful, it's like any technology, it's like anything, it can be used for good or used for evil, and it plays very much a part in my first book, Falling, where the pilot finds out, due to technology, due to the internet, finds out mid-flight that his family's been taken, and that if he doesn't crash the plane, his family will be killed. So what does he do? um, with this book, the way technology came into play, which was really helpful, is that, and this isn't really a spoiler, it happens in the first sentence actually, so it's not a spoiler. The pilot who's flying the plane has a widowmaker heart attack and dies instantly. And it happens to happen at the moment when they're doing a bathroom break, and the first officer is in the bathroom, and he was the only pilot in the cockpit. Um, Obviously the plane ends up crashing. Again, not a spoiler, this happens on page 5. um, but of course, if you see a plane go down and it hits a nuclear power plant, there's going to be a question of, is this a terrorist incident? Which it wasn't, but at the time you don't know this. So then you see, we're sort of toggling back and forth between the White House and on the ground. It's, the book's kind of like a West Wing episode inside like a giant action movie, because we're kind of going back and forth between them of what the response is going to be to this crisis. And one of the things that helps the situation and damps down the reaction is that we do have those social media accounts. We do get to see what happens on the plane in those moments, and we realize this was not a terrorist attack. This is not targeted. It's not happening on other planes. This was an isolated black swan freak accident, purely in the absolute definition of the name. And that is helpful in that they can narrow the focus of, okay, this wasn't an attack, this was an accident. How do we respond in kind?
And listen, it's absolutely brilliant. Even the way you're talking about it makes it palpable and suspenseful. I guess what I felt is we don't have enough contingency plans. I mean, what I felt is that, like, I almost want to put you in the White House Situation Room with a group of people and say, hey, this could happen. How would the FAA handle it? How would the nuclear commission and the things that supervise and regulate nuclear reactors handle it, et cetera? But you're in Minnesota. And I mean, this takes place in Minnesota, and I think you've explained why, because you're going to come down the Mississippi River and all these tributaries. You're basically going to affect the heartland of the United States by irradiating the main artery of the United States, and then all the capillaries and, as you say, tributaries. Let's talk about Minnesota for a second. Minnesota's in the news, and Minnesota's connected cosmically to what's going on politically in the country for the last 4 years. And so hear me out. George Floyd, tragic murder. There's riots ensuing. Joe Biden's about to pick the senator from Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar, to be his vice president, but he can't pick her because of what's going on over there. So he decides to pick the African-American woman, the Indian-American woman, Kamala Harris from California. They ride into the presidency, so now she becomes the nominee, and she picks somebody from Minnesota. So all roads in the last 4 or 5 years politically have led back to Minnesota, at least for the Democrats. So I guess my question is, what did you learn about Minnesota, if anything, when you were writing the book?
It's a great question. And the reason that I placed the book where I did, where I set it where it did, was I realized that, as you mentioned just a moment ago, there's not enough contingencies. Well, where? Because depending on the size of the market that you're in, there may be, if something like this, if it happened in, say, Los Angeles or New York or Chicago, one of these massive markets that have the resources, that have the attention, that have the contingencies, it may not turn out the same way. Now you place this in somewhere like a small power plant in rural Minnesota that was built in the 70s, that is in the process of being decommissioned, And all of these things sort of give it not the attention and not the resources and not the upkeep and maintaining that would be happening in a larger market, right? And it made this really interesting sort of parallel because the community on the ground, the town and the community on the ground, they are the first responders. They are who are going to have to solve this problem because due to circumstances with the crash, which again I don't want to spoil too much in the book, but it's hard to get there. It's hard to get the help that they need. So basically, it's them. It's them on the ground with what they have and who they're with, undermanned, under resourced, out of ideas, out of time, just making it happen because that's just all they have. And I realized in writing this, it became this really nice parallel of, like you're saying, there's the bigger stuff that gets more attention, but then there's also the smaller stuff, the rural places, the things that you don't think about, that don't get the attention, that aren't considered, too big to fail. These are the things, these are the connections, this is what everything else is playing into. And, there's the whole you're only as strong as your weakest link. Like, these are real parallels in the book and looking in the real world of, these pockets of the country that are as vital to the big picture as the big markets, but they don't get the attention. And what does this look like when we don't pay attention to those places?
Yeah, yeah, it's fascinating. There's a butterfly effect. Something can happen over here that affects everything else. I mean, it's the way the world works, and you can have a mistake somewhere in the system that has catastrophic consequences. You also have a benefit that goes on, something positive in the system that also has positive effects. But
And in the book too, if I can just
please,
say one more thing, it just brought this up to me. Like, there's two storylines that are happening at the same time, right? We are facing a potentially seismic, shift in the fate of humanity with this event if we don't figure out what to do about it, right? We are battling that, which is so epic and hard, I think, for the reader to kind of wrap their mind around in a lot of ways, just because it's hard to think of something in terms that big. At the same time, there's a rescue mission happening on a bridge of one person. One group of firefighters is doing everything that they can to save one life. And I kind of toggle back and forth between those two storylines. And it also made a nice parallel, again, kind of to this idea of like bigger market, small town, rural, versus the fate of humanity, the life of one little boy. And it really is a nice sort of parallel going through the whole book, this idea of like, what are we if not the individual? What is the whole if not the individual? And it's that balance of trying to keep both in mind and understanding that both are as important. A rural town in Minnesota is just as important as New York City. And incidents like this are what show you that that is an absolute fact, but we tend to lose sight of that in our everyday lives.
yeah, I would add something, and I want you to react to it. You're also showing what I would say everyday people, which includes you and me, just average people going to work, doing their thing, and they're thrusted into these extraordinary circumstances. And so, one of the things that works in your books, you love people, TJ. I think you really do. You're a lover of people because your heroes are ordinary people that go out of their way to do extraordinary things. Do I have that right?
You have that dead on. You know, all three of my books, there's a theme through all three of my books. They're all standalone novels. They're not related in any way to each other. The only thing that's like thematically similar to all of them is these are everyday people thrust into an extraordinary situation and we see what they do. And I think this is because I spent so long on the plane and when my mind would go to stories and I would think like what would happen if something goes wrong, I'm not on a plane with, a Navy SEAL and the fire chief and Thor and Captain America. I'm with a school teacher, I'm with an accountant, I'm with, a grandma and a grandpa. And so my brain was always, okay, if something does happen, who are we going to be? What is it going to bring out in us? And I have a deep seated belief in the goodness and heroic nature of the everyday person. I firmly believe that most people simply need the opportunity to present how heroic they truly are. I firmly believe that in my bones. And look, I
Well,
know my
it's
books,
a
all of
very
them.
you're writing about crisis and catastrophe, but embedded in this is this very uplifting message about the human condition and the better parts, the better angels of our nature.
Absolutely. All of my books are terrifying. I will fully admit that. They are terrifying and the situations are dire. They are ultimately about hope. They are ultimately about working and sacrificing and protecting the people
Amen.
that you love and protecting the greater good. They're uplifting books at their core and at their essence. I love a survival story. I love a rescue mission. I love a, attempting to avoid disaster. It's that dissonance between peril and success. That's where my books live, and that's what I love to explore.
You're you're making quite a stir in Hollywood. So tell us about that, right? You're ready to rock and roll in Hollywood, right? So
It's
you were a best-selling you're a flight attendant, best-selling author, but now like you're a little bit of like a Hollywood maven, no? Tell me what's going on.
It's wild. Both of my first two books have movie deals. Falling is with Universal, Drowning is with Warner Brothers. There's exciting updates all around there. With Drowning, Paul Greengrass, Academy Award nominated director of Captain Phillips, United 93, the second Bourne movie. He is going to be directing Drowning, and it is being adapted right now by Steve Kloves, who is his resume is incredible, but I think he's most well known for adapting the Harry Potter novels.
Wow.
So knowing that the man who took one of the most celebrated and beloved worlds in literary history and translated that to the screen to create a cinematic version of that that is as equally loved and cherished, knowing that that person who did that job, which is just about the most daunting job I can imagine, knowing that he just hit a slam, a grand slam dunk with that, like I could not feel like my story was in better hands there. And with Falling, I'm actually doing the adaptation of that, which has been a wild experience, a wild learning experience of taking a story that I thought I knew backwards. I spent years with that book, and it took me nearly 40 some drafts to get it where it needed to go to the final product. I thought I knew every way you could tell that story. And then to figure out, oh, there's still so much I didn't know. It's been an incredible experience taking a book that's 300 pages and condensing it down to 100 pages without losing anything is just it's like learning a new language. It really is. And it changed me and made me a better novelist, I think, too, because of it.
If someone was going to play TJ Newman, who would it be?
Me, because I'm a failed actor. So maybe I would finally get my break.
All
Maybe
right, you
somebody
want to play
would cast
yourself.
me as me.
All right, you got to put pressure on these people, okay? That's what you got to do, put pressure. I did that to Oliver Stone, by the way. He wanted me to be in Wall Street too, and he came up with some fake name. I said, I'm not doing that. I want to play myself in the movie. And he said, all right, that's fine. You could do it. All right, so we're down to the. If you remember this from the first time we were on together, we're down to the 5 words. I have my 5 words that we draw from your book, and I want to read you the word, and then you react to the word. Okay, you ready?
Okay.
Thriller. I say the word thriller. You say what?
I say genre. I say that's what this is. It is a page turning thriller.
Falling.
The first thing that came to mind was my first baby. I mean, that was my first book, and I immediately felt a emotional reaction of, oh, just because it's like, oh man, that's where this started. Gratitude. It's my first baby.
Okay, so drowning. Baby number 2.
Baby number two, my second born. God, I'm proud of that book. That was so scary to write. The pressure that I felt writing that book because can you do it again? Are you a one-hit wonder? Was it a fluke? Do I really have what it takes to tell stories like this? It was terrifying to write that book. And so, yeah, proud gratitude.
Worst case scenario.
This one was the hardest to write. This one was the toughest. This one, problem child. I say that for this one. This one was my problem child. If I had my firstborn, my secondborn, this was my problem child. But boy, high risk, high reward. I'm proud of this book, but it took a lot out of me emotionally to write this book.
Well, I mean, it's super intense. I mean, I thought falling and drowning were intense. I mean, this is up 5 notches exponentially from those two,
Yeah.
What
And
about
it
T.J.
also has a
Newman?
lot of heart though. I think it's
Yeah,
a
it's
massive epic story, but like
wonderful
I can't tell you
story.
how many boxes of tissues I went through writing this thing. It's a deeply heart-wrenching story too.
Listen, it's a wonderful story. You can't stop reading it. I mean, you've kept me up at night, T.J. Newman, as I'm sure you have many other people. What about T.J. Newman? If I say
Blessed.
the word T.J. Newman, you say what?
I say
What's that?
blessed. Blessed. Just
Blessed. That's
gratitude,
great. I
blessed.
mean, I
Just
should
yeah.
probably pull the plug on the podcast right there, right? Because that's one of the best things we can say about our lives, right? That we've lived these undeserved lives that we're grateful for. When are we going to get book 4?
I don't know. That's a great question. I don't have a good answer to. I've written 3 books and a script in 4 years, and I need a vacation. That's my honest first answer is like, before I can even answer that question, I'm going to have to take a good long vacation to catch my breath.
All right. Well, don't fly over water. Don't fly near a nuclear reactor. Take a great vacation somewhere and land safely. The title of this book is Worst Case Scenario. It's the 3rd aircraft thriller. I'll describe it that way. It's by T.J. Newman, who's a best-selling author and about to be a blockbuster Hollywood star. Thank you so much for joining us on Open Book today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on. Always great.
So, the story in the book is, as you've already kind of alluded to, Anthony, about a lot of the friction that I encountered, with the president. I talk about the 3 A's of, allies, Afghanistan, and authoritarians, where we had different perspectives. But really, he was aligned. We were all aligned, in a lot of critical areas, like burden sharing, for example, among alliances. Hey, getting our allies to invest more in defense, that strengthens alliances. But then, of course, with Donald Trump, he takes it a step further and says, oh, okay, I'm not going to defend you if you don't pay up, which psychologically weakens, the alliance and could encourage Vladimir Putin. So again, this is the theme of helping Donald Trump disrupt what needed to be disrupted. And what was most effective, Anthony, was we modified kind of the way we would interact with him based on the way he learns, the way he thinks.
Okay, so joining us now on Open Book, a dear friend and somebody I have the pleasure of interviewing before, is General H.R. McMaster. The title of the book is At War with Ourselves. What a great title, H.R. My Tour of Duty in the Trump White House. And so this is, of course, after 34 years of service in the U.S. military. And I want to start there, if you don't mind. I was in London, and somebody said to me, I listened to Open Book. I said, oh, thank you. Are you going to interview General McMaster? I said, geez, I hope so. I'm going to use my Italian guilt on him. I said, well, make sure you bring up, there's a very famous tank battle that he was involved in Iraq, and he was a phenomenal tank commander. So I want to start there. Tell us about your military career. Tell us how you got involved with tanks. And let's start there. Then we'll go to the academic. You write about the Long Island Anthony in your book and the Harvard Anthony. Let's go to the military HR first before we get to the academic HR.
Yeah. Hey, Anthony, thanks for having me, man. I mean, I always enjoy talking with you about anything, and thanks for the privilege of talking with you about the book. And, I always wanted to be in the Army, and I was just, always determined to go to West Point. I graduated from West Point. I was not the ideal cadet, at West Point. I was sometimes misunderstood and a victim of circumstance there as a cadet, but I couldn't wait to lead soldiers, to build teams that, are part of missions bigger than themselves, and teams to kind of become like a family. A good Army unit's like a family. And you're bound together by mutual trust, common purpose, your sense of honor. And what we saw in combat in Desert Storm is our Eagle Troop of the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment. We were bound together like a family, and it's really a bond of affection almost. And your sense of honor, like you fear letting the soldier down next to you more than you fear the enemy, or enemy bullets. And what we did is we encountered a much larger force, a force 8-10 times our size, in the middle of a sandstorm. It was a Republican Guard unit. We attacked because we got a jump on them. If you think about like a boxing analogy, like we stung them with our left, and the right option is to follow with your right and knock them out. And that's what we did in about a 23-minute battle. We destroyed 50 some armored vehicles in those 23 minutes, hundreds of trucks, hundreds of infantry. Later, we took hundreds of prisoners, and we suffered no casualties in our troop, thank God. So, what gave us the power to do that, Anthony, was confidence in who we are as a team, confidence in each other, and we did kind of what we expected, and our soldiers were so well trained, Anthony. I mean, some of them after the battle, they said, my tank loader, he said, "I ain't gonna lie, sir, I was fixing to panic," but I said, "Don't panic, just do your job," and he fell back on his training. And so I was so proud of those guys. And it's the kind of teamwork, that you want to, in any organization. And you saw me trying to build that kind of teamwork within our NSC staff in the White House years later.
Yeah. Listen, I mean, I think this, and I know this. I know this from my business career. We have to build a team. Reagan had a great line on his desk that you can get anywhere you want in life as long as you don't care who gets the credit. I think we both know that line well. Yeah. We've tried to live by that. The book you're writing is about a war with ourselves, but some of it is actually a war with Donald Trump. And it is because he's a team of one. You know that. I know that. You're more or less right about that.
Yeah, not a team builder.
Not a team builder. And so how do you yeah. You're trying to help somebody who's a team of one, and so it's hard to talk to them, right? Because you experienced this. I witnessed you in my 11 short days experiencing this with him, where you're trying to talk to him. He may not know something, but he doesn't want you to know that he doesn't know something. He certainly doesn't want you to tell him in front of other people the differences in political sex in the Middle East, or what various historical treaties mean to different areas of the world. Yeah. And so you're in a minefield. But before we get there, I want to talk about managing that minefield in a second. But before we get there, let's talk about the call that comes in from Katie Walsh, someone I know well. She's the Deputy Chief of Staff for Reince Priebus. General Flynn is being replaced after 2.1 Scaramucci's. All right. So he's blown out after 23 days. And I knew Mike. And I sat next to Mike during the transition. I was across the hallway. We each had our own conference rooms. We were both on the executive transition committee. And I don't want to say anything disparaging about Mike, but I think he's lost his way at this point. And I know you like him, and you can give me your opinion if you want. But he's leaving. You're coming in. What do you say to your wife, Katie? What do you tell me about the transition from private citizen, or you were still active in the military. So tell me about the transition from military work into the civilian job inside the White House.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, Mike Flynn was a friend of mine all through the Army, fantastic officer. I don't know what happened, Anthony, and he sort of got caught up on all these conspiracy theories and encouraging, anyway, I don't know. So,
it's sort of like,
and I think he got kind of screwed
with me. I like Rudy. He helped me early in my career. Right. I don't like saying disparaging things about him now, even though he's lost the plot.
That's right. So, hey, that phone call I tell the story in At War with Ourselves. I'm walking down the street in Walnut Street in my hometown of Philadelphia. Where's my Phillies hat, man? Sorry, no offense to anyone in New York.
Now we got to do this.
So I'm walking down the street in my hometown of Philadelphia.
It's so painful for me as a Mexican. But go ahead, keep going.
My phone rings. It was Katie Walsh, and Katie, Katie says, "Hey, can you go to Mar-a-Lago tomorrow?" This was the Friday of President's Day weekend. And so this is one of those phone calls that changes your life. And, I'd had a few of these. I mean, I was a fellow at Stanford University, at the Hoover Institution for War College, and we're about to invade Iraq. And I get a phone call that I'm going to the Middle East, So I called my wife Katie, you know well, and and said, hey, I got this phone call. She's, of course you have to do it. I mean, she's the same way that I thought about it. This was my seventh commander in chief, that served across my career. How do you not do your duty, and so I go down to Mar-a-Lago. I winds up being a Sunday of President's Day weekend. I have the interview with President Trump that day, and I describe the interview, our interactions, the questions he's asking, and everything. And then he holds me over for a second interview on Monday. There had been a down select from the four candidates. I didn't know who was still a candidate until I ran into John Bolton in the men's room, kind of awkwardly, Ambassador General, And then I walked down into the living room of Mar-a-Lago. The president meets me, goes, hey, there's not going to be another interview. I'm hiring you. He announced it. I fly back on Air Force One to Washington. I didn't live in Washington, Anthony. I lived down in Tidewater, Virginia. They fly me down to pack a bag, and I start work Tuesday afternoon. So I mean, it was an abrupt change into like a significant job, obviously, but I considered it my duty, but also a privilege, to serve in that position and to help what I regarded as a disruptive president disrupt a lot of what needed to be disrupted in Washington, Anthony. I mean, that's what Donald Trump tapped into, is the belief on the part of a lot of Americans that Washington elites had abandoned them, and it had pursued strategies in a foreign policy area and national security area as well that just weren't working for the country or for them.
Okay, and we both agree with that. And I've said this to you. You and I have talked privately about him seeing the desperation in blue collar America that other elite politicians didn't see, or career politicians. And I think it's an important part of our future story, how we heal that fissure, if you will, in the body politic of the country. But I want to talk about something that you address in the book, which is that we do get a lot of things right. We form NATO.
Sure.
We have strategic alliances around the world.
Yeah.
We're trying to reject terrorism. We're trying to find ways around the world to combat terrorism, keep people in the free world safe, and keep them free. And so talk to me, if you will, and you write about it beautifully in the book, about things we're getting right, things that we needed to change, like there's a wrecking ball approach, General McMaster, but then there's also a version 2.0 of software where there's a gunk in the system that needs to be changed. So tell us a little bit about that. Do we need to wreck everything, or are there certain institutions that are vital that need modification? Where are you on this stuff, and more or less what you've written in the book?
So, the story in the book is, as you've already kind of alluded to, Anthony, about a lot of the friction that I encountered, with the president. I talk about the 3 A's of, allies, Afghanistan, and authoritarians, where we had different perspectives. But really, he was aligned. We were all aligned, in a lot of critical areas, like burden sharing, for example, among alliances. Hey, getting our allies to invest more in defense, that strengthens alliances. But then, of course, with Donald Trump, he takes it a step further and says, okay, I'm not going to defend you if you don't pay up, which psychologically weakens, the alliance and could encourage Vladimir Putin. So again, this is the theme of helping Donald Trump disrupt what needed to be disrupted. And what was most effective, Anthony, was we modified kind of the way we would interact with him based on the way he learns, the way he thinks. And what he likes to do is challenge the assumptions of the past. So, hey, what about the assumption that China, having been welcomed into the international order, would play by the rules? And as China prospered, it would liberalize its economy and liberalize its form of governance. That was the main assumption that underpinned U.S. policy toward China since the end of the Cold War. Hey, it's a false assumption. And because it was implicit, it was never really challenged. So we challenged it, and we helped Donald Trump put into place, I think, the most significant shift in U.S. foreign policy since the end of the Cold War, Anthony. And that's one that the Biden administration has carried on. It's an element of continuity. We dramatically changed our approach to the Middle East and to Iran. And the value of a lot of Donald Trump's decisions, especially that one, only became apparent to many Americans until the Biden administration reversed it, and went back to the Obama approach of trying to conciliate the Ayatollah, and the Iranians, and that didn't work. And I think in many ways it encouraged the conflagrations we see in the region, as well as the horrendous attacks of October 7th of last year. So I think that was another big shift. We began to rebuild our defense to address a bow wave of deferred military modernization. We put 180-degree shifts in place on Venezuela. Again, Biden administration, reversed that. How did that work out? This conciliatory approach to these groups, even the Houthis, they undesignated the Houthis as a terrorist organization. So I think that in many ways, his policies were solid from a foreign policy perspective. But in others, he would make a tough decision, Anthony, but then he couldn't keep that decision. And I'm thinking in particular about the South Asia strategy and Afghanistan in particular.
Yeah. So I'm going to test a few things on you. Never really talked about in the mainstream media. I don't bring them up, and I'm just curious to get your reaction. So some would say that the move of the embassy, he was told by the State Department not to move it. He was told by secular Jews not to move it. The Orthodox community wanted him to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And people say that there was a dramatic increase in Hamas funding and other terrorist organization funding after that. Do you believe that, or do you believe that that movement of the embassy had no impact?
I believe it had no impact, Anthony.
Okay.
And the reason I think that the increase in Hamas funding and Hezbollah funding was the Biden administration not enforcing the Trump era sanctions. Once those sanctions hit, the Iranians cut under Trump. They cut their stipends in half. Hey, the other thing to remember is multiple presidents, going back to Bill Clinton, said they're going to move the embassy, and Congress. I think it passed like 49 out of 50 votes in the Senate to do it. It's just no president had the guts to do it. It's one of the good things about Trump is like, hey, he'll do stuff like that, But what we did, Anthony, I tell the story in the book, is rather than just make that decision impulsively, we brought that into the National Security Council decision-making process, and we did our best to mitigate the downside and protect against the risk, associated with it. Now, anyway, it's more complicated than that, but the story's in the book about how we did it and how we helped the president, in this case, I think make the right decision on that. Now, what I would have loved is maybe something else associated with it, like holding out the potential for a portion of East Jerusalem to be maybe a future, capital in a Palestinian state. There could have been other, mitigating factors that the president decided against. But hey, I didn't get elected; he got elected, right? So I gave him the options, got him the advice. He made the decision, and this is an area where the cabinet all moved out. Like the Secretary of State and Defense, they recommended against it initially. But then they did their best to implement the president's decision, which is the way it should be.
Okay, let me try another one on you. Okay, that's great that you refuted that. What about the slowdown of armaments to the Ukraine? Something that he was impeached for, frankly.
Right.
Was space created as a result of Donald Trump's decision making and this unexplained love affair with Vladimir Putin, which, frankly, you write about? You can't figure out what the love affair was. I certainly can't. I can't even speculate what it was. But the theory that he slowed down the arms. We had this Operation Porcupine since 1994, fortify the Ukraine to protect the Ukraine, some form of deterrence. He slowed down the arms. NATO seemed fractured. We're going to go for his first NATO speech at the first NATO summit in a second. Putin said, hey, we got an opening here. This NATO thing is in disarray. The Americans have slowed down their arms shipments. Let me attack Ukraine. Or you don't believe that?
Well, I think it was wrong.
Tell me what you think.
Hey, I think it was wrong for him to suspend arms shipments to the Ukrainians to get dirt on the Bidens, to use in the election. But hey, Anthony, I think what green-lighted the Russian invasion was the fecklessness of the Biden administration, demonstrated with the disastrous withdrawal in Afghanistan, responsibility for which is shared with the Trump administration too. And I write about that. I criticize both administrations on it. But hey, when that happened, when August of 2021 in Kabul happened, I think China and Russia said, these guys are over. They've surrendered to a terrorist organization, or at least defeated themselves. And remember the joint statement before the Beijing Olympics, Anthony, where they're like, hey, you're done. We're in charge now. It's the new era of international relations. I think that's what led to the reinvasion. And the Biden administration, I would say, they pulled our ships out of the Black Sea. The Biden administration suspended weapon shipments to Ukraine too, to allay Putin's security concerns. We listed all the things we wouldn't do to support Ukraine, We evacuated and scuttled our embassy, right? And took all of our advisors out. And then we offered Zelensky a ride out of the place. I mean, to me, that looks like we almost greenlighted the invasion. So I think, the story I tell in the book about bringing the decision to President Trump to provide javelins to Ukraine the first time, the point I was trying to make to him, and I describe how we did it with the chart and everything, is that what provokes Putin is the perception of weakness. Trump got that, but then he doesn't stick with it a lot of times, depending on who's in his ear, whether it's Rand Paul or whoever it is. Some of the kind of, I don't know, the retrenchers or neo-isolationist wings of the Republican Party. Anyway, there are a lot of stories in the book about Ukraine and his evolution of his approach toward Russia. And I'm concerned about this. Is one of the areas I'm concerned about, in a second Trump administration, is would he sustain that support? What I'm hearing about these, so-called peace plans would be a gift to Putin and misunderstand Putin again. Putin won't stop unless he is physically stopped in terms of his aggression, not only against Ukraine, but against Europe and the West in general.
What do you think it is? If you had to speculate, never says a bad word about Putin, always praises Putin, tells people during an invasion how smart Putin is.
Yeah.
What do you think it is?
Well, there's a couple things. I want to hear what you think, maybe too, Anthony, because I'm sure you got thoughts on this. But I think overall, he fancies himself as like the great negotiator, right? And if you want to negotiate with somebody, one of the techniques, right? We learned this in getting to yes, man. In negotiation mediation theory, you separate the relationship from the negotiation, and you try to build a good relationship. That's one big part of it. He wants the big deal. I think that's one big part. Also, I think he sees authoritarian leaders regarded by their populations in the way he wants to be regarded, right? As a strong man. And then the third aspect of this, is he really wants to do what's right for the country in some areas. Like he's really worried about like the nuclear arms race, nuclear instability, and he thinks, okay, if I can get a really big deal, right? How great would that be? So I mean, it's not all just weird motivations or warped motivations. He wants to accomplish some tangible things with Russia. And finally, Anthony, he's reflexively contrarian. So like if everybody tells him, hey, Vladimir Putin has to be confronted. Vladimir Putin is not going to back off. You can't cut a deal with Vladimir Putin on Ukraine. He tends to kind of want to do the opposite of what he hears. So does that make sense to you? I mean, that's how I view it. I don't think he has anything on him. I don't think there's any, and all of that I think is noise that feeds into, his kind of sense of beleaguerment and insecurities as president. The Mueller investigation, all of that, charges of collusion, it created a really negative atmosphere, in that first year. And I read a lot about that in the book as well.
So, I mean, this is your interview, me interviewing you, not you interviewing me. But I'll just say one thing, and then I'll switch to something else. I think it's a money thing. I know this sounds weird, but he loves money and he loves attention, and I think he sees himself as having a moneyed relationship with Vladimir Putin. He wanted to build the Moscow Trump Tower, and he sees Putin as the richest person in the world, and I think it's a money thing. But whatever, that's just me. I agree with you. I don't think they have anything on them. I don't think, and I think it's very simplistic stuff. Which, but to me, it's unpresidential. But that's just for me. The United States, because you've looked at our intelligence briefings, the adversarial relationship we have with Russia. What they're doing to foment division in our democracy. You may remember this. You recommended a book to me called Putin's People by Catherine Belton. I don't know if you remember that.
Fantastic book.
But you got me onto that book, and during COVID, I read the whole book, and it would be hard pressed as an American president if you read a book like that to say, "Hey, I'm going to be so praiseworthy of Vladimir Putin." I mean, no American president would do that. So, all right, but let me. I know we're limited on time. I just want to go to two quick things, and then I'm going to ask you to respond to a few things. But I want to go to the NATO summit. And I want to go to something that I think you call reflexive contrarianism, where you tell them, don't mention the fact that there's we could use Venezuelan troops as a military option. And then he goes out to the press and says, well, we could use,
No,
he
actually,
wants,
Tillerson is the one who said it, and we're walking out to the press
yeah,
conference, and I said to Rex, I said, hey,
he
that's the
will,
first thing he's going to say now, yeah,
that's part of his narcissism. He has to show you that it can be done on his own. He's a team
yeah.
of one. I'm going to drag myself to the presidency by myself without listening to anybody. And I'm going to run the presidency by myself without listening to anybody. But go to the NATO summit first. I know we have a few minutes left, and I want to get you to respond to a few things.
Okay, so NATO summit is I tell the story in the book, that he hosts President Macron, and at first we're like, man, are these guys gonna have a good relationship? I was worried about, but then they got along almost too well because Macron's kind of bagging on NATO a little bit. The president is also, and I thought, oh, this is not the frame of mind when he's going to NATO. And we were going to NATO to dedicate a 9/11 memorial with a piece of the Twin Towers and doing it to commemorate the only time that NATO has come to the defense of an attacked nation, us, on 9/11, right? So as we're prepping for the speech over multiple, weeks, in recent days for sure, and, he wanted to put this line in there about like, if you don't pay up, if you don't pay your dues, which was really investing in the country's own defense to a minimum of the equivalent of 2% of gross domestic product, that we're not going to defend you. I said, hey, Mr. President, listen, you can make the point on burden sharing. But once you say that, the entire narrative is going to be about you not coming to the defense, and you're not going to make the point you want to make about burden sharing. You're going to get in your own way on this. So he was persuaded by that. But then, Anthony, again, at the 11th hour, Stephen Miller comes out, like the head speechwriter and domestic political policy council lead, and he looks at me, and I could tell he was like, afraid that I would get super angry with him or something. It's like, it wasn't me. I swear it wasn't me. And he added this language back into the speech. We're about to get into the beast, the president's car, to go to NATO headquarters. And I'm walking down with the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense. And I said, hey, you got to get in the car with me and talk him out of this, because it's destructive to our interest. It's destructive to Trump's own agenda. And they're like, oh, no, I don't really, we're not going to get it. I said, get in the effing car, please. They got in the car. He changed the speech. But now, of course, you've seen this rhetoric, come back during the campaign.
Can't help himself. So all right. So we're here. You're a military person. I'm not going to ask you anything politically. I want to be respectful of that. But you've written a book that people should read, and I think they can draw their own conclusions. But my producer and I, we've got 5 words that we want you to respond to. And since we have 2 minutes left in the podcast, I'm going to say the word. You give me 1 or 2 sentences. Okay, you ready?
Yep.
So when I say the word duty, you say what, General?
I think it's our duty as Americans to do the best for our country to succeed. Certainly, as a military officer, your duty is to the Constitution of the United States. And my duty as National Security Advisor was to help the elected president make the best possible decisions.
So subordinate personal interests for the greater good of the country, right?
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. United States. I say the 2 words, United States. You think what?
I think it's past time for us to get beyond the vitriol of our partisan political discourse and the interaction between identity politics and old forms of bigotry, sexism, racism, and reemphasize our common identity as Americans, and also to celebrate, the great gift of being in a country where we have the freedoms that we enjoy. We should celebrate those freedoms and celebrate our common identity as Americans.
Okay, so that's the reunited states. I love that. I got 2 words. We got just a few more. We're going to end it shortly. I say the words White House. You say what?
A privilege to serve there, and a great team. A great team that works there that Americans don't know. I mean, I tried to tell the story in At War With Ourselves about, like, not everybody was at war with themselves, and we had a fantastic team on the NSC staff who worked every day to help the president and advance the country's security, prosperity, and influence.
When I think of the White House, I think of like an extended stay motel. I was there very briefly. Okay, I'm kidding. Okay, let's go to the word Trump. I say the word Trump. You say what?
Disruptive, flawed. Yeah, but not weak, right? Not weak, right. But disruptive and flawed. And the question is, Anthony, I mean, how how would you help him if he's reelected? How can anybody,
Right.
help him again disrupt what needs to be disrupted? But again, I read in the book, the sad thing is, Anthony, he becomes the antagonist in his
Right.
own story, right?
Right.
He's the
Oh,
antagonist in his own story.
he's become an anti-hero, which is totally unnecessary. He does stuff that's so self-destructive. But let's go to 2024. Your thoughts there?
Okay, 2024. That you're talking about November 5th,
Yeah.
2024.
Hmm.
Yeah, I just think it's not it's not a great choice, but I just got to tell you, Anthony, as a military officer, and you've heard me say this, I think the military is getting drugged into partisan politics by both parties, and we got to stop it. And even though I'm just a washed up general, I think if I were to like endorse a candidate or something like that, they'd
No,
be
no,
like,
I
oh,
don't expect you to
that's
do that. I
military.
just think, I
Yeah,
think, right. So I would say 2024 is a crossroads.
yeah,
Crossroads, because if Trump's defeated, a new center right coalition has an opportunity to brew up. If he's not defeated, then what he represents in this whole MAGA thing could be transformative to the country, and we may like or dislike it. I'll leave it up to other people to make that decision. Before you
Can
go,
I say one thing, Anthony?
yeah, go ahead.
I just hope that no matter who's elected, that Americans, try to help that president succeed. I'll
Yeah.
tell you, we've seen like the renewed Russian efforts to undermine the election. Hey, I don't think the Russians give a damn who gets elected. What they really want is just to ensure that large numbers of Americans doubt the legitimacy of the result. That's
Well,
what they
that
really
was
want.
That's what Catherine Belton said in her book, and I believe that. Before you go, I just have to say that you lasted 41.3 Scaramucci's by your own rendition, and since I'm the official scorer of Scaramucci's, you scored yourself properly. So I just want you to know that. But the funniest part about my time in the White House, you invited me to your house. I think it was at
Yeah,
Fort McNair. And you
right.
said, we're going to have a welcome to the West Wing party. Of course, I got my ass fired before the party, right? So you had the party slated for August 1. I got fired on July 31st. But you're a good sport. I'm a good sport. We had a goodbye from the West Wing party.
That's right.
And
Yeah,
Gary Cohn, a couple of my buddies showed up.
yeah.
Your wife was there with your beautiful daughters. And it was a great day for me. And it
Yeah.
was a sign of good sportsmanship, right? There we all
Absolutely.
were
Yeah,
cooking
yeah.
burgers, having a beer. I got
Right.
fired. I never blamed the president for my firing. I own my firing,
Yeah.
and I appreciate you trying to save me. But I also understand why General Kelly fired me. So there's no ill will anywhere. But the book is awesome, HR. I know you have to go. The title of the book is At War with Ourselves: My Tour of Duty in the Trump White House. It's a great picture of the two of you because I can see the look on your face like, what the F am I getting into? And of course, you had to write a several hundred-page book to describe that. And I admire you a great deal, General. Thank you for being a great American, and thank you for coming on the show.
Hey, Anthony, I admire you, and when I describe you, I often use the word irrepressible, the irrepressible mooch, and and
Somebody's got
I
to be
enjoyed
right.
the hell out of that one Scaramucci that you served for, man. It was great. It was great to serve with you.
Well, it was fun for me too, and I consider you a dear friend. So I'm grateful for our friendship.